Hello and welcome to another episode of Lessons from the Dragon's Library. My name is Trevor Bierschbach. I'm an author, I'm a gamer, I'm a journalist. I do a lot of things. So if you're new, welcome to the Frags and Beer Network. This is kind of the channel where I do all the different things that I do on YouTube, so you can kind of see a little glimpse of my life if you're interested in the different kinds of things that I'm interested in, and kind of spend some time with me. So I started these seminars because a lot of writing podcasts and seminars and classes didn't really cover some of the things that I usually wanted to learn about. They all seem to cover the same things, which is fine because some of the basics you do need to learn. You need to know different perspectives on things like show don't tell and all of that, but there was a lot missing. So I'm going to try to offer some of the things I found that was missing, but I also want to offer things that you may have noticed is missing when you're looking for a good writing podcast or a writing seminar or something to learn. I'm going to check the sound real quick just to make sure that I'm coming through well. Yep, I sure am. Sorry, I don't normally do a sound check beforehand. That's the nature of, I like doing these things live, so you kind of get to see the bells and whistles and how the sausage is made and all that good stuff. Anyway, before we jump in, you can find all the links to my stuff below. You can find my books on Amazon.com. You can find them on my website, trevorbierschbach.com. You can find my Twitter link, Facebook, etc., all below. The only ad you're going to find on my content is for a website called thebeardstruggle.com. You can save 15% there on beard products if you use my code BeardWizard99. If you're looking for gifts, also a great place to check out. If you have a beard in your life that you want to smell better, feel better, be softer, skin that you don't want as dry or flaky, or somebody you know who's just looking for something new, check out the website, use the code, get them a gift. We're coming up on the holiday season, so check that out. Anyway, so now we're going to jump into this episode. Was suggested by Necessary Whimsy on Twitter. She's a reviewer and book commentator and writer. You can follow her on Twitter at Necessary Whimsy. She suggested a couple of different ones, and this is the last of the ones she suggested. She wanted to hear about using money or monetary systems in writing. So before I jump into that, I just want to say this is an interactive show. Obviously only if you're watching the live stream, but if you're watching the recording and you have questions, you want me to go back over something, or you have suggestions for another show, drop it in the comments. If you're watching the live stream, be sure to drop something in the chat. If you have a question, if you have a concern, or if you want me to go back over something that you didn't quite catch, drop it in there. That's what I'm here for. I want to help you guys learn what I've learned over many years of writing. Now, my credentials, I'm published. I published my first book in 2018. Well, I'm going way back. But I've been writing for a very long time. It was just the first time that I felt good about something that I had written and decided to publish it myself. It was also when the publishing industry changed a lot and made it easier to do that. So that's going to lead me into this episode's tip, this writing tip. Your publisher should pay you to publish your book. So what do I mean by that? There are a lot of companies out there that are preying on the oversaturated market of authors and people who want to become authors and people who want to publish books. And they're going to ask you for money up front. Publishers do not ask you for money up front. If they do, they're not a publisher. So let me get that out of the way. There's a lot of them out there that call themselves publishers. They want you to pay upwards of $7,000 to $10,000 for their base package to publish one book. They are not publishers. Publishers don't do that. Most of the things that they offer, you can do yourself for free or extremely cheap. I looked at one the other day and actually wrote an article about this, or a post about this, on my website, trevorbierschbach.com, where I give you some examples. I believe the starting price of this one place was $7,000, and they didn't even offer editing. They offered proofreading that you could have done yourself for a couple $100, maybe even less. Just proofreading, just looking for commas in the wrong place, bad grammar, misspelling. No actual editing involved whatsoever. All the rest of the stuff they do for you, you can do for free. They do your formatting, they do your uploading to Amazon, they do your cover design. Granted, your cover design, they use stock images, they use stock things. So there's a good chance, because I've seen it happen to other authors, there's a good chance that your cover will wind up the cover on several other books as well, with different words on it, because they use stock images and they use free images, which you can get yourself, and you can customize and you can cut and you can create your own covers. But they're going to charge you $7,000 just to publish your book. Just as an example, it cost me all of $0 to publish my first book. It cost me nothing. I spent $0 to get my first book in print. The only thing I had to pay for was the copies of the books. And then I turned around and sold them and made a profit. So the chances of you making a profit on your first book when you pay a company $7,000 is very slim. Let me tell you, it's really hard work to sell books as an indie publisher. You have to get out there, you have to hustle. You're already going to be spending money on shows, you're going to be spending money on fairs, on craft things, you're going to be spending money on advertising and marketing and all the things you need to do to sell those books. It is going to take you forever to recoup that $7,000 minimum that you pay that company to publish your book. So that's our tip. Do not pay somebody to publish your book. Publishers pay you. All right, so we're going to jump into monetary systems in writing, or using money in your writing. This is kind of a topic that, depending on who you talk to, goes one way or the other, like very drastically. Some people will just flat out say, don't ever use money in your writing. Be very vague about money. Nobody cares about the money in your writing. So they'll be very, very stringent about not doing it. Then other people will say, well, you have to, and you have to get very detailed with it. It really depends. It depends on what kind of story are you writing. So the first thing you want to do, is you'll need to decide, first of all, what type of currency. What kind of world are you building? If it's a modern world, let's say you're writing a story in modern times or relatively modern times, monetary systems already exist in the world. So if you're writing a book set in the last century on Earth, you already have all the research done for you. What countries use what currency, what they look like, how much they're worth, what the average cost of things are. All that is done for you. So that's actually relatively easy. That's not that difficult. When monetary systems get challenging and when people really start to decide whether they're going to use it at all or just be super vague about it is when you're writing fantasy or science fiction. Because those monetary systems don't exist. You have to create them. And not only do you have to create them, but you have to decide how detailed do you want that creation to be. So you have to decide, do you want to use, what do you want to call it? How much is it going to be worth? Is there an exchange rate? Are there going to be taxes? Is there anything else involved in trade? Is there a barter system involved? So you have to decide all those things. What do you want the currency to be called, and what do you want it to be made up of? Is it going to be precious metals? Is it going to be paper notes? Is it going to be electronic credits? There's a lot of different options out there depending on what your genre is and how detailed do you want to get. So that's the first thing you got to decide is how much work do you want to put into the monetary system, and what do you want to call it. So it does work best in fantasy and science fiction to create your own. Obviously, you don't want to go writing a book set in the 1990s in America and completely overhaul the monetary system. You're going to lose your reader immediately, and you're going to waste a lot of time. So when you're creating your own, obviously it's going to work best in fantasy and science fiction. But that will mean more work. So what you want to do, I would say the first thing to do is going to be to study at least give yourself a good overview, or a good, what I would call a 10,000 mile view of how money works in the real world. Now, we obviously know when you buy and sell things, you exchange paper notes or hard coins for those things, which basically say, this phone is worth $1,000, those shoes are worth $50, back and forth, and depending on what you buy, and you work for money and all that. We know how that works on the surface, but you probably also want to know how do exchange rates work, how does markets work, how do taxes work, how does saving work, and interest. You want to get kind of a good layman's understanding of those things, so that you can at least write about them believably. And some of that's going to depend on your character too. How smart is your character? How much of a money person are they? Do they know a lot about investing and interest rates and things like that? Or are they an average, Joe who goes to work every day and goes and buys groceries and comes home? So that will determine too how much detail you need to put into your monetary system. Is going to be a lot based on the character. So just try to get close when you're dealing with modern money, unless you're writing a book for that target audience that is into money. Like if you're writing some sort of financial thriller involving, market speculation and stuff, then you're going to want to kind of know what you're talking about, because your target audience is going to know, and they're going to know when you're wrong. So that's something to keep in mind, is who's your target audience as well, and how in depth you want that, because you got to be careful. The more in depth you want to get with something that technical, it's just like writing about anything super technical, writing about sciences or writing about aerospace technology or anything. Whenever you start dabbling into things like that where there are experts in those fields, you really want to pay attention to maybe even get somebody who can explain things like that to you. So should you use it at all? That's obviously going to be your first question. Do you even want to bother? What type of story are you going to have too? That's going to be a pretty big determining factor. Remember, we talked about character-driven stories and the difference between character and milieu stories. A milieu story is a story that sort of details and talks about a whole world. You want to introduce a whole world and its land and its people and its cultures and its holidays and its religions and its history and all of that. That's kind of a milieu story. Now, you'll obviously have characters within that story, but the main focus of your work is going to be in building that world. Now, if you're building a milieu story, there's a good chance that money is going to be one of the things that you want to include, and probably a relatively fleshed out monetary system. It would be kind of a lackluster, I guess, if you developed, let's say you developed a whole continent with all of these countries who were fighting against each other and politically aligned with some and fighting with others, and you're dealing with all this stuff, but you don't sit down to decide how they trade with each other, how they use money, and how their money affects each country. Something would feel left out. Now, if you're building a character-driven story, you may want to get less detail. If you've got a character-driven story where it's really focused on the character and less on the world around him, you may only need to say, John's going to buy himself a new pair of boots, goes to the store and pays the man for his boots. Now, the reader is not necessarily going to care how much John paid for the boots. He's not going to care what John paid for the boots with. If you're doing a character-driven story, you're not as focused on building the world around John as you are as focused on John. But if you do want to include the money, you need to really think about how you're going to use that. How does that affect the world? Again, what's better? To say John paid for the drinks. It might be the last beer he tasted for a while. Or do you say John fished 2 coppers from the bottom of his pouch and tossed them onto the bar? Might be the last beer he tasted for a while. So which one of those is better? Now, they're both good. They're both okay. They're both describe what happens. They both give you a sense that John is on his last legs, or John is facing something dire. Maybe John is going to war. Maybe John is going to sea. John is about to get arrested, or he only has 2 coppers left to rub together. Either way, you get the sense that John is having his last drink for a long time, and he pays for it. It's up to you to determine how detailed you want that scene to be, and subsequent scenes if you're going to use money. You also need to think not everything needs to be money. When you sit down and determine a monetary system, you got to think the whole economy of your world, especially if you're going to get that detailed as determining what the money is and how much it's worth and exchange rates and all that stuff. What else do the nations use for, trade? Do they trade in goods? What goods does one country supply to another country? When I sit down and build the world of Thelos for my current work, I sat down and decided which countries were rich in some things and what they lacked in others, and that's kind of what you need to decide, and try to base it on what they have. If you've got let's say the plainsmen of Zephyr in Thelos, the Zephyrite plainsmen. So they are a nomadic horse riding people who live on these vast open plains. Obviously, their trade is going to be in horses. Their trade might also be in horse byproducts, leather, milk, meat. They might also trade in the things that they hunt on those plains. I can imagine, I imagine the Zephyrite plains as being, maybe the steppes of either Russia or the steppes of Africa. And so you're talking big game that they might hunt, elk or bison or bear, whatever it is. So they might trade in those kinds of things. But then what would they be lacking? Well, the nomadic people might be lacking, they might be lacking metalworking as a significant part of their culture. A forge is not something you can easily just pick up and move. Now, obviously, they're horse people, so they are going to have some rudimentary forges if they shoe their horses, but maybe they don't. So maybe they trade their furs and their skins and the things that they hunt and the byproducts of the things that they hunt for metal weapons and arrows and armor. Those are the kinds of things you need to think about when you're thinking about your monetary system. Is not just what coins do people exchange, but what trade do they also exchange? What makes sense for one society to have a lot of that they then want to trade to another society for things that they don't have a lot of? So that's something you need to think about too when you're developing your monetary system. It's not just literally the money, but the economy itself. Another decision you're going to have to make when you're doing your monetary system is it going to be, are you going to leave it kind of the same across the board, or is there going to be an exchange rate between countries? So in a lot of fantasy worlds, let's take, we're going to use this example here in a little bit, but let's take Dragonlance. Dragonlance is a world built off of Dungeons & Dragons, so it uses the same monetary or similar monetary system to what the standard game Dungeons & Dragons uses. So you've got platinum pieces, gold, copper, silver, and all of those have an exchange rate within that currency structure, but not really an exchange rate from one nation to another. So if I'm remembering my exchanges right, 100 copper equals a gold, 10 silver equals a gold, 10 gold equals a platinum. So that's your exchange rate. Very rudimentary, very basic. It's basically saying that each metal is consecutively more valuable than the next, and here's how many of these you need to make those. That's a very rudimentary exchange rate, and that's one way you can do it. Another way to do it is to determine, do your countries each mint different types of currency? Now, in the real world, that's how it works. Spanish money was not the same as English money, was not the same as French money, was not the same as Chinese money. So, and this is talking currency before the modern world, before we introduced, exchanged notes as opposed to money. Money used to be a literal valuable item like, rare metals, cast into coins that were then exchanged for products. So now we have paper bills that we exchange, and that paper bill represents a monetary value, but the paper bill itself has no real value. It's a piece of paper with ink on it. It literally has no value in and of itself. It represents value. Now, in the past, you would have a gold coin that was an ounce, say, or a half an ounce, and that ounce gold coin was gold. It was valuable in itself. You could melt that gold coin down and you still had an ounce of gold. If you burn a dollar bill, you have ashes. So that's something that the modern world has sort of changed in, but exchange rates have also changed in how they work. But let's say back in our fantasy setting, you decide that one country mints all of their gold coins in a half ounce mint, and they use a slightly less valuable gold. Or let's say, better yet, to make things a little more interesting, they have half ounce gold coins and they are backed by a bank who is in a lot of debt, so doesn't offer as much because they're collecting interest. So see how complicated this can get. Let's say this bank has a lot of debt, so every half ounce gold coin they take in, they tax it by 1/10, right? So now you've got to determine each half ounce gold coin on the market is worth actually 90% of its value, because the bank that backs it is going to take 1/10 of its value if you bring that coin to the bank. So if you were to say go buy something, you have a half ounce gold coin, I'm going to go buy a pair of boots. Well, the guy you're buying the boots from is going to have to go deposit that money eventually in the bank, and when he does, he's going to lose 10% off the top. So he's going to pass that cost on to you. Now, let's say you come from another country who mints 1 ounce gold coins. Now, logically speaking, one gold coin that weighs an ounce would be worth 2 gold coins that weigh half an ounce. But consider that those half ounce gold coins are only worth 90% of their value in that country, and so on and so on. You see how complicated that can get. It doesn't need to be that complicated, and you can build it that complicated, but you don't have to put that in the book. You could literally just say that, these coins are worth a little less than those coins. You don't have to get into the minute detail of how much less or why they're less. You can just say, because the bank takes 10% off the top of interest whenever blah, 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 these coins are worth less than those coins. Or you can get super detailed and you can literally explain away the whole economy of your world. Now, you're probably going to lose your reader if you get too detailed. Then again, some people who like milieu stories, people who like reading about those super detailed fantasy worlds, like look at Game of Thrones, how popular that is. People who really enjoy reading those types of books might really like that. So you never know. So, does the world, does it add to the world? Or is it just words on the page? That's going to decide, that's going to be a big deciding factor. Does it actually add to the world? You don't want to just throw something in there because it's cool. It needs to add something to the world. It needs to make the world more interesting. It needs to affect the story as well. You can't just have money there for no reason. And so you really need to consider, how is it affecting the world? How is it affecting the characters and story? And is it worth it? Is it worth spending the extra lines or words to add money or a monetary system or an economy to your world? And in a lot of cases, some part of it might be valuable. It really depends on what you're going for. Also, you got to think, so the other thing you got to consider, once you've decided if you're going to use it and how much you're going to use it, how complicated it's going to be to use it, then you got to decide what's it going to be. Does the money have names? You know, gold doubloons, gold pounds, crowns, talons, shekels. You know, the names for money is different all over the world. Denarii. I mean, we could go on coming up with all the different names of money around the world over the course of history. Point being, do you just want to call it gold coins? Do you just want to say, you know, John paid 10 gold for the boots that he bought from the cobbler? Or do you want to say John pulled 10 gold crowns out of his pouch, paid for the boots that the cobbler made for him? However you want to say it. So you got to decide that. What do you want it to be called? Does it even have a name? It doesn't have to. And is it regional? Does everybody call it the same thing in your world, or does each nation have a different name? And then finally, is it just a valuable metal, or are there other things? And does it have to be the same valuable metal? We often get trapped in this idea that our fantasy worlds and our science fiction worlds have to match our own world. And in some cases, it's a good idea to stay close to the world that we live in, because it's easier for your reader to transition into your fantasy world if there are recognizable elements. You know, if you changed the definition of everything and said that, you know, red-headed people were called brunettes, and I don't know, like, you could go on for days finding examples of changing commonly held preconceptions and finding that balance with fantasy. I read a book, not recently, but last year I started to read a book where within the first couple of pages they had already made references to Earth months. They had made references to Earth locations and idioms that we use on Earth that are based on locations, like it's cold as the Alpine wind. The Alpines are, you know, the Alpine wind is a colloquialism. Is that the word I'm looking for? That's an idiom we use on Earth because it's based on a location where it's really cold. So when you use that type of thing in your fantasy book, you're going to lose fantasy readers because they're going to have a hard time thinking of this as a new place. But if you change everything about the new place so that it's completely unrecognizable, you're also going to lose them. So you got to find that balance. You can find that balance with the money. The example that I used earlier of Dragonlance. So the Dragonlance books, based on the game Dungeons and Dragons, but they also had one element in their monetary system that wasn't. In at least the Chronicles and beyond, the common currency in the Dragonlance series was steel. Steel coins were actually more valuable than gold. And they're probably explained why that was, and I don't remember. There's probably somebody that can correct me and tell me exactly why steel was more valuable than gold. Probably had something to do with the war that was going on and how rare and valuable steel was. But point being, you don't necessarily have to build your world exactly like Earth. Gold doesn't have to be the most valuable metal on your world's planet. Gold could be super common. Maybe gold is the pennies of your world. Now, that would be a little weird. That might be a little off-putting for most readers. But just because every other fantasy world and our world and every other thing you've been out there has talked about gold coins basically being the highest value of anything, doesn't mean you have to do that. You can use all kinds of different things. Obsidian, certain types of stone. Maybe they take a very special wood and they smooth it out into these wooden coins, and it's such a rare tree that can never be cut down that the coins only come when these trees fall on their own or something. Like, there are ways you can create a new money or a new name for money to make your world unique. You also don't have to necessarily use coins, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. If you do use exchange rates, you need to consider the comparisons. Modern exchange rates are based on a ton of factors that wouldn't exist in your fantasy setting, but they might exist in a futuristic setting. There isn't going to be a stock market. There isn't going to be speculators. There isn't going, or most likely won't be interest rates in a fantasy setting. In a fantasy setting, there's a good chance that your exchange rates are going to relate more to weight than anything else. So you've got to decide, is there a standard weight for coins? Does each nation mint their own? Do they mint them? Does a third party, say World Bank, determine what the currency should be minted at? Maybe they have a standard, the gold standard, that they say all your coins have to weigh exactly this much or whatever it is. I kind of imagine the Iron Bank from Game of Thrones. It's really the only bank they talk about in that world, and it seems to be where everybody goes. What? My computer started to go to sleep. Hold on. And I lost my document here. That was really weird. It's almost like my power went out. Hold on. I need to I guess my computer that literally never goes to sleep when I'm just sitting is actually going to go to sleep when I'm recording video, which is kind of funny. But oh, look at what it's doing now. What is it doing? Hold on a second. I want to make sure my YouTube stream is not messed up and I didn't lose you guys. Let me make sure I didn't lose you guys. Little technical difficulties with the live stream. But I'm going to double check that it's good over on this side here. Yeah, so we're still good. I don't know why everything started to crash on me, but we seem to be all right. So if you're watching and you comment in the chat, I may not see it in time until I can get the studio back up over on this screen, which I may not ever be able to do because it doesn't seem to want to cooperate. That's kind of unfortunate and frustrating. So anyway, what I was saying was, is this a standard weight enforced by a third party, similar to the Iron Bank in Game of Thrones, in that it's some sort of world bank that decides everything and sort of sets the standard for how much each coin can weigh and how much each nation can tax or whatever it is, so you've got to determine that. And then you also need to determine, will there be different denominations? Will they all use the same coin? Will it all be a 1 ounce gold coin? Or will it all be... man, this is frustrating that the YouTube studio will not come back up for me because I can't see what's going on. Yeah, let's see what happens. So that's one of the things you got to decide. Are they going to have multiples? Most countries in the world had different levels of denominations because things cost different amounts of money. And you had people who didn't have as much money. Obviously, if really rich people are paying for expensive things with gold, solid gold coins, you might have the poorer people who are paying for things with copper or silver or tin or brass or whatever it is that you decide. So you need to decide, is there going to be different amounts, or is everything going to cost gold? Now, you've got to consider, if you only have one denomination, that means you can't make change. That means your lowest cost items in your story is going to have to be 1 gold coin. And now if gold is a super valuable thing, you got to think about that. If you're going to have 1 mug of beer at the bar cost a gold coin, then how much does food cost? And then how much does clothing cost? Like, so you may be limiting yourself. The more you limit your monetary system, the more you could be limiting yourself with your writing and your options and what you can do with it. I think what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to pull back up YouTube and I'm going to go back to the studio and see if it's still running. And I don't know. I see what I don't want to do is kill the stream. I don't want to kill the stream by clicking on anything. Yeah, I think I lost it. Boy, that's weird. I don't understand why that happened. So I don't want to mess with the stream anyway. So be patient with me. If you do comment in the chat, there's a delay, so I may not see it. If you have questions, I'll see it over here on the main stream because I am watching that. All right, so back to the show. Sorry about that. The bumps and bruises of a live show. All right. So if you're going to use money, make sure it impacts the plot like we talked about. Make sure it works for the story. Make sure it works for the world, and make sure it impacts the plot. What I mean by that is if your hero, if your main character, or if your group of main characters is going to have money, you need to consider things like how much do they have? Is it going to run out? Are they rich? Are they poor? Are some of them richer than others? Those are things you have to consider. Your character cannot have an unlimited amount of money. Your reader's going to start to notice. So you need to think about that. How much are they carrying around with them? And you might want to kind of loosely keep track of that. Like, you don't need to get super detailed. You don't need a spreadsheet saying, oh, he has this much gold and silver and he's got a few copper coins and blah, blah, blah. But you do need to be relatively aware of where you're at with that money and how much they have left and what they can do with it. Otherwise, your reader's going to start to take notice if you're getting a little crazy with the money. Also think about the world. Is there counterfeit money? How does it work? Would the characters use it? Would they come into contact with it? Does it matter? Are there other things that they could be using as money? Does your world have a hybrid money/bartering system? Maybe people can trade for goods as well as money at merchants. Who knows? Like, those are things you're going to have to decide. And you're going to have to decide how that affects the story and how far you can go with it. And then the final point, which we're going on, I think we're going on 40 minutes or so almost. So the final point is, do not forget weight and size. This is something that a lot of storytellers neglect, and they forget that they can't just have, they can't just come up with a number. They can't just come up with an arbitrary amount of money in their mind and say, okay, yeah, my characters are carrying around that much money, or the ransom is, $10 billion in 2 black duffel bags. Like, there's a reason that's a trope, the money in the suitcase trope, because in a lot of storytelling, especially TV and movies, they literally forget, or they don't care how much money actually weighs and how big it actually is. So, for example, modern currency, about $1 million in $100 bills weighs about 22 pounds. So if you were to go to the bank, if you had $1 million in the bank and you got it out all in $100 bills, doesn't seem like a lot, 22 pounds. That's about 2 gallons of milk. So if you think about that, and it would have to go in a large briefcase or suitcase. You can't fit $1 million in $100 bills in a standard size briefcase. Won't fit. You need a big briefcase or a small suitcase to fit that weighs about 2 gallons of milk. Not a lot, but imagine your character is carrying that around all the time. Now imagine your character is also paying the ransom for their kidnapped loved one, and they want $200 million in mixed bills, because that always seems to be the thing. Mixed, untraceable bills. Now you're getting into the realm of the incomprehensible. There's no way an individual could carry that much money. There's no way an individual could put that much money in a couple of nondescript containers like duffel bags or suitcases. You're talking a pallet of money that needs to be moved with a forklift. So that's something to consider, is how much does money weigh? Now, in our example of in our example of fantasy money, a modern gold coin, let's say, comes in several weights. Let's say you've determined you're going to do your weight by ounce. 1 ounce gold coins is going to be your standard currency. Oh, my hoodie just fell off my... It's like, what is that sound? It's my hoodie falling off my chair. All right, so let's say you've determined that standard gold is going to be a 1 ounce coin. 100 gold coins, which doesn't seem to be a lot when you're a role player, when you're talking about fantasy money. 100 gold coins weighs about 6¼ pounds. That doesn't sound like a lot, but everybody seems to carry their fantasy money on a pouch on their belt. Go get a 5-pound dumbbell or a 5-pound weight or anything else that weighs 5 to 6 pounds and hang it from your belt. Tell me how comfortable that is. Make sure it's metal and tie it with a piece of string and walk around for a few minutes. Tell me how comfortable that is. 100 gold coins in a bag hanging from your belt is not only pretty heavy, but it would be banging around on your leg. It would be slapping you in a lot of places you don't want to be slapped with 6 pounds of force or more. That's not great, especially considering that the average longsword, like not fantasy longsword, but literally two-handed longsword from the Middle Ages, weighs about 3½ pounds. So you're talking a guy who carries a longsword on his belt weighs half as much as 100 gold coins. So consider that when you're deciding what your character carries around for money. Do they have that much money? If they do, how are they carrying it around? Are they carrying it in a bag in their pack? Are they carrying it spread out over different parts of their body? Are they carrying it in a money belt? Those are things you need to consider, is where are they carrying it? They're not just going to have a big bag of gold coins hanging from their belt. Not only is that uncomfortable and weighty and dangerous, because that clinking bag is going to be a target for pickpockets, cut purses, and thieves. So that's something you need to consider. Now, also consider bulk currency. This is one of the things that a lot of people forget about, not only when they're playing role-playing games, but also when they're writing fantasy, is bulk currency. Are there smaller things or lighter things that are more valuable that somebody could be carrying around to use as currency? If your main character has come into a large sum of money, let's say an inheritance, or they just stumbled upon a treasure chest, right? Chances are they're going to convert that money into something smaller and lighter. Precious gems, precious stones, even bars. If you're going to store, let's say you're going to store a lot of gold and you've got 100 gold coins, you could have those cast into, 100-ounce bar of gold. Makes it a little bit easier to transport than 100 loose coins. Also makes it harder to lose one of them. If you've got 100 coins dancing around a ship, swaying and rolling in the wind, on the waves and whatnot, one of those coins could fall out of its container, roll across the floor, roll under a floorboard, whatever, and be gone. If it's a bar of gold, it's harder to lose, right? It's also a little easier to transport. It weighs the same, but it's in one piece rather than 100 pieces. So that's something you need to consider when you're thinking about whether you're going to use money in your writing, monetary system, economy. How are you going to build that economy? So anyway, we're at about 45 minutes, and that's kind of where I left off with my notes. That's kind of all that I had written up. If you have more questions about using money in your writing, you have suggestions or ideas or things that I may have missed, leave them in the comments. Let me know what you think. I'd also like to see in the comments if there are any other topics you want me to cover. I'll come up with other topics that I'm thinking of covering, ideas and story writings and tips and things like that. But I really want to know what you guys want to hear. I want to know what you're interested in learning about. I can't be the only one that feels like a lot of writing podcasts and seminars are leaving out things, just not covering everything. So let me know what you're missing out on. Let me know what you'd like me to talk about or discuss, and bring it to me, either on Twitter, on Facebook at Trevor Bierschbach Writes, or in the comments of this video or the other videos. There are 3 others out there where I covered using death in your writing, character-driven stories, and I forget what the third one was. But there are currently 3 lessons from the Dragon's Library on the Fragsbeer Network, and this makes the 4th one. So again, thank you so much for joining me. If you watch the live stream, I really appreciate it. Check out the rest of my streams. If you like gaming, if you like podcasts, if you like just general geekery, check out the Frags and Bear Network and look at the rest of the playlist and what there is to offer. Please like, comment, subscribe. I want to get to 1,000 subscribers by this time next year, so I really need your help. Share the videos, share the channel, ask people to check it out, and subscribe if they're interested. If you aren't a subscriber, please do click that button. You don't have to click the bell for notifications, but it sure would be awesome if you just subscribed to the channel. It helps us little channels get seen. It's the way YouTube's algorithms work. And again, if you're looking for beard products, either a gift for the beard in your life or for yourself, check out thebeardstruggle.com. Use my code BeardWizard99 to save yourself 15%. It's good stuff. I actually use it. It's the only way or the only reason that I promote it, because I use it myself and I really like the product. It helps keep my skin healthy, helps keep my beard healthy, and my wife really likes it, which is a bonus. So check it out yourself. So anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I will see you next time. Much love. Have a good one.